Hello everyone. Welcome back to Anupam Tech Talk. This is episode number 25 and today we are going to talk about something that is behind many fast applications and websites, caching. We often notice that a website or an application loads very quickly. But have you ever wondered why? One important reason is that system may not be doing the same work again and again. Instead, it may be using a cache. So today, let's understand caching in a very simple and practical way. Let's talk about the problem. Imagine that our application receives the same request thousands or even millions of times. If every request goes all the way to the database or another backend services, we repeatedly doing the same work. That can increase response time and also put unnecessarily load on our systems. Users expect application to be fast, so we need a way to avoid doing expensive work repeatedly. That's where caching becomes useful. So what exactly caching is? In simple terms, a caching is a place where we temporarily store data that we expect to need again. Instead of getting that data from the original source every time, we can retrieve it from a faster location. For example, your browser may cache images and other resources. An application may keep frequently used data in memory. A CDN can cache content closer to users. So, caching is not limited to one particular technology. It is exists at multiple layer of a system. So let's talk about cache versus cache miss. Let's understand the basic flow. Suppose our application needs some data. The first thing it can do is check the cache. If the data is available, we can call a cache. We can return the data quickly without going back to the original source. But what happens if the data is not available? That's a cache miss. In that case, the application gets the data from the original source, such as database or API. Then it can store that result in the cache so that the next time request can potentially be much faster. This simple pattern is one of the foundations of caching. So let's talk about where does caching happens. One important thing to understand that caching can happen at different layers. At the client side, browsers and the mobile application can cache data. At the application layer, we can use an in-memory caching. At the network layer, a CDN can cache content closer to users, and even database themselves can use caching internally. So when we are designing a system, we need to think about where caching provides the most value. The right layer depends on what we are trying to optimize. Let's talk about the trade-off. But caching is not a magic. It also introduces some challenges. The biggest one is the stale data. Imagine that we cache a user profile information and then that information changes. What happens to the old cache version? We need a strategy for that. We may use something called a TTL or time to live, which determines how long an item should remain in the cache. We can also invalidate or update cache data when the original data changes. Another consideration is memory and cost. We should not cache everything. We need to decide what is worth caching and how long. How engineering thinks. This brings us to an important engineering question. When should we actually use caching? I usually think about a few things. First, is this data requested frequently? So, is it expensive to calculate or retrieve? Third, can the application tolerate slightly stale data? And finally, what happens when the underlying data changes? These questions help us decide whether caching is appropriate, and most importantly, we should measure the impact. We should not add caching just because it sounds like a performance improvement. We should understand the problem first and then measure whether caching actually improves the system. So, let's summarize today's lesson. Caching is essentially about avoiding repeated work. Instead of repeatedly calculating or retrieving the same information, we temporarily store it somewhere faster. A good caching strategy can improve application performance, reduce backend load, and help systems scale. But caching also introduces decisions around freshness, invalidation, memory, and consistency. So the real engineering skill is not simply knowing how caching works, it's knowing what to cache, where to cache, and how long to keep it. And that's an important part of building fast and scalable application. That's it for today's episode. If you found this explanation helpful, consider liking the video and subscribing to Anupam Tech Talk. I'll see you in the next episode where we will continue exploring the practical engineering concepts. Thank you for watching this episode.